What up, everybody? Welcome to episode 6 of the Comrades Classroom Podcast. This is the 4th episode of our 4-part series on disability justice. On it, we get to sit down with 2 of our close comrades, Sam and Arti, as they discuss the everyday violences of ableism through their personal experiences. This is just the first of our guest interviews, so stay plugged in for more episodes coming soon. I promise we got some dope guests coming on. As always, please support our work by becoming a sustainer of our Patreon. It's the only way we can keep feeding people and keep pushing our survival programs forward. We need community support. We need collective care. We got us. Free the people, free the land. So we're really excited to have y'all on to talk about disability justice and your own experiences within that. And just grateful that y'all made the time to do it with us. So our guests today are Arti and Sham, and we'll let them introduce themselves in a sec with our introduction question. So one of the first things we want to talk about, and one thing that kind of sounds like the goal of our interviews is to talk about people's individual experiences and path towards political consciousness. And either of you can talk first. So the first question kind of just like, however brief, however long, can you tell us a bit about your experiences in life that led you towards kind of this path of political consciousness, or kind of got you to where you are today and involved in the movement work that you're in today?
Would you like to go first, or would you like me to go first?
You can go first.
Okay. So my name is Arti, spelled A-R-T-I. And I guess it's kind of hard to track exactly the path, because I've sort of always been a little politically conscious, at least of my positionality coming from a low-income background in a rural area without very much access to resources. And always seeing the struggling my parents were going through. But I guess actually putting language to the sort of political understandings I've always had, really, or the underlying values that I've had, I guess really has come in the past year or two, that I've been in academia, which is one of the enablers of colonial ableist institutions, just absolutely horrible for ableism. Just being around other people who have political consciousness, much more developed than mine, and also having online communities that I had sought out from being excluded and whatnot because of my identities and my disabilities when I was younger, and growing up in a very, small rural area. So yeah, that's not very linear way, but I guess it's sort of a vague introduction. And yeah, just being a disabled person and a neurodivergent person. I wasn't, physically disabled when I was younger, but I was neurodivergent still. And, just that sort of feeling of exclusion also, definitely led me to, seek other avenues of finding people who understood me and who could, relate to my situation and my, experiences. So yeah.
I really appreciate that, and that's kind of what I found too. People's paths are always different, but a lot of times it's either you lived in political consciousness because of your experiences, and or had to find that. So I really appreciate that perspective, and we'll leave space for Sam.
Hi, Sam. SAM. They, them, she. And I guess along the same lines, I was born with a congenital deformity, so I was born disabled, but never had the language for it. So it was constantly performing ableism in a Latinx household who was very assimilated and like didn't know it and didn't want to acknowledge it, and like it was difficult. It was weird because like nobody else felt the way I did growing up with two brothers. Like this is just like they didn't have to think about all of the intersectionalities of like their identities because they didn't really have them. But I did, being like disabled, neurodivergent, chronically ill, and the only one in my family that was like that. So like we were working class poor, basically, just constantly in debt. And like that was always the turning point, or like the noticeable thing that like parents think you don't know, but like you do know. And it kind of like, it gives a better idea of like capitalism as a child, because you're just like, damn, I don't really want all of these things. I want to be able to like eat. And like, as messed up as that is like the road to political consciousness for a lot of us. So yeah.
I appreciate that. And in talking to you other times, you talk about how like your own experiences within or with your disability and trying to find care and trying to navigate the medical industrial complex. So I'm wondering if like what about having to navigate that kind of led you to, I know, like wanting to work alongside or at least work towards addressing some of the violence that does occur inside of a lot of different medical spaces.
Yeah. So like, that's rough, right? Because being disabled and chronically ill, it was constantly about figuring out how to advocate for yourself, to get people to, like, our physicians to actually listen to you, especially being always slightly overweight, even as a child, and then like Latinx and female. And it was really hard because I'm neurodivergent as well. Like I've had severe anxiety since I was like 5. So trying to like balance mental illness with like also ableism, and then like figuring out like what do I want to do with my life, because like that's like a choice you have to make pretty early on. Coming from like a working class family, like you don't get to like aspire to things, you just have to like do. So like it really made me want to be part of the medical community.
If we'll just jump real quick, or if you want to jump into this next question. And I know again, like these experiences, right, are a lot, like really traumatic and can provoke a lot. So I want to give like space to y'all to allow that and allow for y'all to have that space too, and step away if you need. Or if you want to jump in. If you want to talk a little bit and share your own experiences navigating disability and maybe some of the challenges you faced, and or just talking about what disability justice means to you in your own life.
In terms of like personal experiences with disability in ableist world, I know like even like also coming from like a working class low income family, and especially being in like a rural area, like I think the closest hospital was like a half-hour drive away, and the closest like mental health clinic I think was at least 40 minutes to an hour away. And like I definitely always knew there was like, you know, something different in my brain, you know, being neurodivergent. But I never really had like access to resources to sort of like even understand that. And that's also part of like being in an ableist world, is like not having access to even understand yourself as a disabled person, as a neurodivergent person. And I guess also one of the things that always really struck me is particularly related to not specifically me, but to my dad, because like he's always been like the main person doing a lot of the work in our family and helping to keep us together. And like I've just like watched him over the years as he's like slowly, like his body is just slowly breaking down, because he deals with all of the same disabilities that I do basically. But he like, I'm lucky enough that like I've had him to help provide for me. And because of that, he's had to like lose so much of his life and his like body just by like not being able to treat his actual disabilities. And yeah. And then again, for my own like personal experiences, yeah, it's just been really difficult. Like I said, like I'm still not officially diagnosed with any. I have a diagnosis of anxiety and a mood disorder, undisclosed, which is still very vague. Like my neurodivergence still isn't diagnosed. So it's also part of that is also like not even really knowing like if I have the right to call myself neurodivergent or disabled, even though like I've done so much of this reading, I've done so much of this research, I've had so many of these like such troubling experiences because of what I have to deal with. But it's still sort of like not having access to like diagnoses. It's like, well, am I actually dealing with this, or am I just being dramatic? Am I actually dealing with this or whatever? Yeah, it's basically like it's kind of a constant challenge to just like get up and do the things that I need to do in order to be alive, basically. But I'm also really lucky in the fact that like I do have people who support me. And I think that's like also part of the question on the document, like feeling safety, comfort, and support. I feel especially supported by like other disabled people. And it makes like the reality of being disabled and having to like struggle more than like abled and neurotypical people like a little bit better. And it honestly adds like so much to my life that I wouldn't have had if I weren't like disabled and neurodivergent. So yeah, that's kind of a rambling on. I kind of forgot everything that I just said, but yeah.
No, that was great.
I can also keep talking if Sam needs more space.
You're also more than welcome to keep talking. I was going to ask kind of a question, because like I know in other spaces we've talked about too, this challenge that folks face, their disability or their neurodivergence isn't visible or isn't something that like is like tangible for able-bodied folks or for like ableist structures to like see or like cater to or like whatever. And I wonder if you can speak a little bit to, or either of you speak to kind of that, how that the challenges, right, that brings along, especially with the medical industrial complex and folks kind of already ignoring the needs of the disabled community. But like, what extra challenges might you face if your disability isn't recognized or isn't visible to folks? Yeah, having to prove yourself or prove your disability to other folks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess like being somebody who's in academia in one way, and this isn't specifically related to like the medical industrial complex, but also like the very fact that like receiving accommodations to just be able to like do what I need to do in order to like have the same, like be on a similar level as other people. You have to have all these diagnoses, you have to have all of this, all of that, all of whatever. And you have to like prove yourself in that way with like doctor's notes and whatever. And also like part of being neurodivergent and disabled, like mentally disabled in particular, is like people only see that in like one way, right? If you don't look like like if you have ADHD, if you're not constantly like bouncing off the wall or something. Like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Sorry, my partner was calling me. I'm gonna take a second to text them and let them know I'm in an interview right now.
No, of course. Take your time. Take your time.
Stop it. Okay.
Our cat just jumped at the door to try to open it. So.
Oh geez. What was I saying? I can't remember. Wait, there's something.
You were speaking on. You just had finished talking about like the need for like the proof of diagnoses, and then how that plays, or kind of how neurodivergence or navigating neurodivergence in diagnoses.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, specifically that. It's also like, since there's also so much overlap between so many different ways of being like neurodiverse and mentally ill, diagnosis is really hard to begin with. And ultimately it's just like a bunch of random points assigned on like this huge spectrum of various things that people just decided to give a name to. So the criteria are honestly like bullshit for a lot of them. And that's why so many different things are like comorbid. But yeah, it's like, unless it's like literally completely like the most severe case somebody could possibly imagine in like a neurotypical person's eyes, like people are constantly like, well, are you sure? Like, you don't do this. Are you sure? Like, you're even experiencing this. And from like my psychiatrist too is like, wouldn't even give me like, let me pursue ADHD testing. Cause he's like, you don't have ADHD. I think it's just because of your bipolar that you're experiencing this. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure, pretty sure I have this, weird distractible brain no matter what. But thanks, doc. And yeah, just kind of being like constantly gaslit and like told you're making shit up, or that like, and even telling yourself, like gaslighting yourself and being like, I'm not this, I'm just, it's like internalizing all those things that people say on the internet, like, you're not depressed, you just want attention. And it's like, do I just want attention? I do tweet about mental illness a lot. But it's obviously like a very complicated thing. And yeah, just I don't know.
It's also just like so ableist in the first place to like need a diagnosis in order to even like be deemed worthy of like extra help, even though you're asking for it. Like literally like having to, because like for me personally, like it wasn't even that like I had the option of being like called disabled or chronically ill. Like they refused to put that on my reports. Like it was like, no. Like your bones are just a weird way. Like, well, yeah, that's kind of, that means I'm a little fucked up. Like I'm not the typical body. So like, why can't we address it? But it was always like, well, we could work to make it different. Or like, there's always like this surgery that you could do, or like this med that you can take. And it's just like, okay, but I do all the things and I'm still the way I am. So can we just call it what it is? Like if I'm walk like a duck and quack like a duck, can you call me a duck? Because it would be nice. It would be easier. And like, once you do give yourself the language, you then have to get everyone around you to also want to call you the language, and then actualize the language with your physicians and psychiatrists and therapists. And it's just like so much gaslighting and so much negative reinforcement for you, because you're having to tell these people these things over and over again, and then you're like, damn it, am I making this up? And you're like, no, I do feel this all the time. But then you're like, but I've said it so many times that like I feel these are gaslighting yourself. And it's
like when you write the same word over and over and then you ask yourself, is that spelled correct?
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah. Like all of a sudden I can't spell the.
Is that a real word?
And it's like that, but like every day of your life.
I think one thing too, I don't think that gets talked about enough, especially in regards to disability justice. Like I know when we've been like reading and talking about it as a group, like we've seen it in how like folks in the disabled community have always been in the trenches, a part of every struggle, really, if you look back throughout history and in the deepest trenches of those struggles. And it makes me think about how like we don't talk about the intersect or disability and the ways in which like our trauma and our generational trauma and the environments and the spaces that we're forced to exist within that are like extremely violent also either cause or enhance is not the right word. Exasperate, like cause or exasperate, right? Disability and or other like issues in our lives. So I'm wondering if either of y'all could kind of elaborate on that in the way that like when you look at folks in underdeveloped communities, when you look at folks in the who exist and are intersected by different identities, like they are often like the most vulnerable and experience disability or ableism more violently. I don't know if I'm asking that question right.
No, I feel like when I think of that, I think of like how the most likely person to have an eating disorder is like a 10-year-old Black or Latinx little girl. Like that is ableism. Like the fact that like these like poor communities who don't have access to like fresh foods and like are more than likely to be overweight, which is like a whole other awful part of the medical industrial complex. Like they're the most vulnerable to this, and it starts so young.
Yeah, or like asthma in like ghettoized communities, right? From like environmental racism.
Like literally living in communities where like the air quality is so much lower, and then wondering why like generations upon generations have more and more severe asthma. Like it's more than it's so many intersections of issues that it becomes like overwhelming, because then you're like, it's capitalism, it's also like ecofascism, it's also the medical industrial complex, because like those people are the ones that go to the doctors the most often, pay the highest copays. And then like within my own life, like the living in like constant fear as a child had obviously like set my brain to be more likely to have severe anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder, and then exasperated that like growing up in a abusive household. So like I didn't have a chance to not be the way that like my neurodivergent brain is now. And like it's taken so long to even like try to figure out how to like navigate it, which is like still a daily struggle. Like I don't control my brain the way like other people do. And like knowing that is like, it was always really hard. It got easier like having steps and seeing like therapists, which is also just like a huge privilege. Like I'm lucky that I have an insurance that, and I only have to pay like a lower copay, whereas like people have to pay $100 out of pockets to see a therapist once a month. Like all of these like privileges also like weigh heavy on the fact that like I know that there are other people just like me experiencing 100 times worse because they don't have the access that I do, and I still have shitty access. Like that's not even saying that I have like great insurance or great health coverage, but like all of these things like factor into everything that I do. And it's a lot.
You know, Sam, as you were speaking to it, it struck me about something I think we've talked about too, which is like the medical industrial complex desire to like blame all of these disabilities then on something like being overweight, like pushing it all onto these things that are themselves very violent. And so the remedy, the remedy itself is just as violent as what the material conditions of existence.
Yeah, or you get denied care for things that you, or for needs that you have, because it's written off as something else, or yeah.
Or like the fact that fat phobia can like literally kill. Like they don't have to do certain things for you because you're overweight. Like that is a whole other type of like issue that we don't even talk about.
Like, oh, you're not sick, you're overweight, so it's your fault, you can go home.
Yeah.
For everything.
You know, I remember when I was going through my hip replacement, and like I lost mobility very quickly, and my body swelled up as my bone died inside of me. And like going in, and the first thing having doctors tell me about, like, whoa, it's about your weight. Like that's why you're feeling this pain. That's why you're feeling this pain. It turns out it takes, a year of going to the doctors and working through this, and just finally to get that addressed. But like, when we've been talking about that really has been clicking with me, like that this pushing away of like the actual problems and hiding it behind this thing, this very violent solution to everything.
Yeah, it also like not only in like just in I guess to add another intersection to it. I know some friends who, for example, are like trans-masculine, wanted to get top surgery, but were told they had to lose weight first.
Mm-hmm.
Like that they couldn't have the surgery until they had lost a ton of weight. Which, like, if you're already suffering from major dysphoria because of the way your body looks, and you're told that your body is not good enough for you to even be able to alleviate your dysphoria, like that's horrific for a person as well.
Yeah, no, there's just so many intersections to it, and I think one thing we talk about too always is that it's going to be Black and Indigenous, trans, queer, and gender nonconforming folks who experience it the most violently. So I know perspective on it. And I just the question came up, in my head just because I was reading something about how. Like we just don't talk enough about how trauma and generational trauma can also lead to physical and exacerbating current chronic illnesses and stuff like that. But yeah, if we want to move on a little bit, I'd love to kind of hear y'all talk about what does disability justice mean to you, or why, or how you've kind of incorporated disability justice into the organizing work that I know both of y'all do in your lives, either online or advocating in your community and or on the ground.
Sorry.
And if it's easier to start with that question, just like what does disability justice mean to you in that framework?
So like I feel like we talk about it so often, or like we've talked about it often enough that like it's hard to like verbalize cohesively for me now. But like I guess like in just like quickly, a disability justice to me means like in every space nobody feels unheard, or like unseen or unthought of. And like that's like really broad, right? But it also is like encompassing so many things that like we don't that you like have to then think about all the time, which is like what is how is like what I'm saying and what I'm doing affecting everybody around me, as well as like how are we all working cohesively in order to move in a way where everyone feels safe and secure, and like these things are disability justice to me, and like it's the most hands-on part of disability justice that we like participate in, because it's really being acutely aware of like everyone around you. And it's like really easily, I feel like it's easily seen and reinforced. Like I see it a lot in the group chats, and then like how other people respond and like branch out and become like their individual within like talking to them, or like the questions that they ask like become more specific and like oriented. And like I don't know, that's how I view disability justice in our spaces. Like just everybody just fully being within themselves and around everybody else still. Hard because like I have a really hard time personally with like groups and like social anxiety. So like seeing everybody be able to do that is like a win.
I agree wholeheartedly with everything just said, and don't really have anything more to add because that was very, very beautifully put. Yeah, just really like a place where everyone can be heard and seen and supported. Absolutely, I agree.
I had a question, I lost it, and I was gone, and it was there. It was something about what you had just said. It's gone. Well, maybe eventually. I guess, I mean, that was perfectly said, so there's nothing to elaborate on there. But without that, then, like without that framework, without being able to center of the needs of everybody and make sure that everyone in the space is. Oh, I remember my question. See, look at that. It might not even be a question, but you just made me think about how, because you're talking about, right, how disability justice frameworks and disability justice in general that you believe, right, happens in a communal environment, but also empowers the individual and like the individual and like empowers the individual to see themselves and have an identity within in a collective space. And it just made me think about how ableism and not addressing folks' different abilities is intentionally isolating. Like it intentionally isolates folks from spaces, and folks are then isolated a lot of times on their own because the only way they can survive comfortably is in their own apartment with the things they have accessible to them. I mean, like going out in public or going to do things like is impossible, and so you're because of ableism, you're now isolated and not able to go and find those connections and build that community. So I'm wondering if either of you want to talk about just the importance of those spaces in your life where that are accessible to you.
You can go, Art.
Just
because I answered the last one really long.
Yeah. Yeah, my brain's also being especially weird tonight. I know, like, even like, I guess it's really difficult, and this actually like relates to the question, kind of like sometimes even in spaces where I know I feel safe, there's still like an underlying like feeling of anxiety there for me. Like I feel comfortable with y'all. I feel safe speaking with y'all. I know that y'all will like accept what I say and can, work to understand me as a person. I'm still sweating like a dog because I'm so anxious being here and being interviewed. Like, like literally not drip. Like that's TMI. Sorry, but
I think I got some sweat on my face too.
Yeah, me too.
You start to sweat.
It's also been really warm here lately, which is nice. A hot, solid 38 degrees outside, which is a heat wave.
A brisk 38. Oh. A warm 38. The sun was out though, huh?
Can you feel your toes?
Yeah. No, I actually like I was wearing like shorts and a tank top today with my windows wide open. Like that's how it feels being 38 degrees right now.
That's how I know I'm fucked.
Oh my god.
Anyway, back on topic. Yeah, what was the question again? Like the importance of spaces where
like yeah, like that are accessible to you or that you feel safety, like having community. Because I know a lot of us don't really have access to that or haven't had that in our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am very lucky in the sense that, especially having been able to be in academia and meet a lot of other amazing disabled people there who are very committed to like the liberation of disabled people. It's like, it's helped me feel like a fuller person because like I have other people around me who like, add pieces of themselves to me and who, it's like I don't know how to explain it, but it just and not saying that I wasn't a whole person before, but like I can really like see myself as a whole person and like the way I fit into different spaces better. And like when I'm in like, I guess, less accessible spaces that are way less comfortable, that are way more difficult to deal with, it helps. It makes that a little bit easier to manage because I know that there are spaces I have where I can be who I am, and where I can have my needs met. And I really honestly can't even like qualify the importance of that for me, because it's also constantly shifting, and like I'm constantly realizing new things that are, affecting me and like how the people in my life like supplement me as a person. If any of that makes sense, but yeah, it just and obviously under like the current disgusting like capitalist systems we're under, there's no really like 100% accessible space for anyone, honestly, but like the places that are most accessible for like my needs and the needs of those people around me are just so like beautiful and very rare, honestly.
Yeah, finding space that I didn't feel awful in was rough. I guess the first space for me ever that was like accessible / like I saw other people with disabilities was like Twitter. And like that was, and like following like random like people who were disabled or chronically ill. And like Instagram also. But like it wasn't until like 2020 where there's like actual space, like in Comrades classroom, like things like that, where like my disability was actually like taken serious, and like not even taken serious, but like taken serious by me. That internalized ableism is the hardest, right? It's like it's every day in your brain always. But like that, I guess that's one of the hardest. That's one of the most alienating feelings, is like thinking about the fact that like you're the only one really being ableist towards yourself, because like nobody really knows that you're like struggling, like because you're right, or like physically inside your body and it's not like showing to the world, and then you're being ableist to yourself and you're like gaslighting yourself, and there's no one around to tell you that like, hey, you should stop that, because your brain is like, no, that's right, like you're wrong. And being able to share that online and other people being like, I do that too, was the most connecting thing. That trauma bonding. The easiest forms of friendship. But yeah. that was always important for me, or still is. It's the void.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree with that. Online spaces have always been really important for me too, even before I even had really a concept of like disability as it applies to self, right? Yeah. I remember it's so strange also, like when I was like 15 years old, I was like connecting to these random emos online through like some music or whatever, and we all turned out to be like neurodivergent and disabled, and then like growing with one another. It's really interesting to see how that's evolved for me. So yeah, I definitely relate to that as well.
Yeah, my favorite is still following accounts that like I used to talk to, but like randomly about weird stuff on Twitter, and now I see them like post stuff or like have big account followings. I'm just like, that's crazy. We thought about like crying together on the phone. Wild. Because like I've been on Twitter since I was like 12. Some crazy shit.
Oh Lord.
Very desperate for any type of community, obviously.
I was on Tumblr when I was 12 too, and it was
Tumblr.
Don't expose everyone like that.
Listen, I don't know any single person in my life, at least, and that's honestly like that's a whole different conversation of like technology and like making things so much like making, I guess, that feeling of wholeness, that feeling of being seen for disabled people so much more accessible. Because like if I didn't have technology, I like not even exaggeration, I probably wouldn't be alive right now. I probably wouldn't be alive right now if I hadn't had access to technology that gave me access to people who like understood me, because I felt so like isolated that like and this is kind of getting a little bit too, dark, but yeah, like I didn't really have anybody in terms of like friends in my life. So like technology like literally saved my life. It literally saved my life. And continues to as well. So I can't underestimate the importance of that, really.
No, genuinely, it's like it's different when like you really don't think you have anyone like in real life, and like the presence of like anyone is just like life-changing at that time. And like for me, that was, you'd scream onto Twitter about how like you don't want to live or like you want to do X, Y, and Z, and like people cared. And like that sounds crazy because like Twitter is such a toxic place now, but like it was one of like it was also one of the places where like I felt most whole, because like, and you know, like I personally, like my family, you weren't allowed to struggle. Like we were struggling too much. There was like other things to worry about. Please don't like add. So you just didn't. And having the internet was the that kept me from doing a lot worse to myself than I did.
No, I really appreciate y'all actually for bringing that perspective up. Grateful for it, and I think a lot of people will feel seen by it too, because especially I think younger generations, but I mean our generation too, from our parents and older generations, like we're always told how just social media is bad, and I think a lot of kids right now, and thinking about my students, like go through a lot. And what y'all are saying, because they're intentionally disconnected from people, from the internet, and they like starve to find that, and they don't feel validated in finding that via social media. And so I think people will appreciate that perspective, because the reality is it is hella important, and research shows that like we form the same bonds and emotional connections on internet relationships as we did in real life. Like research shows that. So I just really appreciate that y'all added that. I mean, I guess kind of as a last question, and this has been amazing, but if y'all want to speak to it at all, and I think it goes without saying, and y'all have already proven why it's so necessary. But like, what do liberation movements miss? What does our work miss? What does our everyday work towards liberation miss if we don't center our most vulnerable siblings? Like where will we continue to go wrong if we don't choose to listen to the voices within the disability community, the voices within the trans and queer and gender nonconforming community, right? The Black and Indigenous, like what do we miss when we don't actually center disability work in our liberation movements? And if it goes without saying, we can go without saying and end it here.
I feel like it's definitely been said like a million times that like the silencing of disabled folks is like always led to like just the tumbling of like any type of movement, because like you're not factoring in what is inevitable, which is accessibility. Like inevitably everyone needs access your body gives away. Like it's not an option of when to organize around it, or like when to put it into like your framework. It's more of a reality of like looking at ourselves as like the disposable that we are. Like we end, and like that you're always just going to need to take it into consideration. I don't know. Like, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I also think like when you don't like center disability, and not even just in like organizing spaces, but also like in your own personal life, like checking like your own like ableism toward other people, toward yourself as well. It's like you're also like, I guess you're sort of like losing an acknowledgement of your own like humanity and the humanity of the people around you in a way. Because like if you're not really acknowledging your own and other people's access needs, regardless of, you know, or like because of, and not because of disability, it just like limits everything you're capable of doing. And like, I know even earlier, I think not to call you out, but like before we had this meeting, when you were saying like, sorry for like being the worst, and you like had to be a little bit late for the meeting. And I was like, you're talking about that when we're having a discussion on disability justice? Like, you know, like it's not to put you on blast or anything, but like,
no, for sure. 100%.
You know, it's just like, it's also like the losing the own like space that you can provide for yourself to like be a person and not adhere to these ableist standards of existence. Yeah.
No, I love that. I think it's so important because y'all both got to that, right? And I'm glad you called me out too, because I think if you don't have these frameworks in your vocabulary, in your politic, in your principles, it's not sustainable, right? Even if you claim to be anti-capitalist, even if you claim to want the destruction of, if you still exist within that in terms of your output and your work and your like obsession with production, even though you claim to be anti-capitalist, right? That's not sustainable. And I think we recreate that environment so much in ourselves, in our movement spaces, in our communities, and we're forced to, because we are working class people, yada, 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 and students with deadlines, all this stuff, right? And I just think a lot of people don't hear that or recognize that. Like, even if we want to talk about achieving these goals, but like none of them are sustainable. And we will burn out individually or as a collective if we don't listen and actually implement frameworks of disability. So I appreciate that, the call out, because right, it's not just about understanding them and using the language, but it's also about the trial and error of implementing it, and then being able to address when you weren't able to implement it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm always one to like bully people who are being mean to themselves.
I think that works. I think bullying works in that way.
I think that's really, really important, actually. I would like to be bullied more often.
Yeah, DJ, would you let me save your apologies for when you actually cause hurt?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, well, that's all I got in terms of questions. If y'all have any last things, or G, if you got any questions or last things.
You cut out there for me for a second. What'd you say, DJ?
I don't have anything else to ask or to bring in. So if anyone has any last thoughts or questions, we definitely leave space for that. But if not, I for real appreciate y'all. Appreciate this conversation.
Yeah, this is amazing.
Thank y'all for inviting me into this space, and I guess trusting me to speak in this podcast, because I know I tend to ramble and speak too quickly, so I'm not exactly the greatest for a podcasting voice, but I just really appreciate this space, and thank you all of y'all for sharing your experiences, and always much love from me.
My feet for you. Walk across the moat and love will be the sea for you. I don't know why I do what I do for you, but I know it's such a thing as too loyal. And I know my memory is getting shorter by the minute. Tipping over bottles every second that I finish. The mirror keeps telling me shit I don't wanna hear. I seen the brasserie and shed a tear. Am I home? Am I the only one away? And if not, how long am I to wait? Heaven's gates, the list don't got my name, but that's okay. Shit's boring anyway. I put the blisters on my feet for you. Walk across the moat and love will be the sea for you. I don't know why I do what I do for you, but I know it's such a thing as too loyal. And I know my memory is getting shorter by the minute. Tipping over bottles every second that I finish. The mirror keeps telling me shit I don't wanna hear. I seen the brasserie and shed a tear.
Cause I like